This guy, thanks to his superpower, does whatever he wants and lives wherever he wants.
Okay.
But is it really so? If you've ever fantasized about teleportation like in Harry Potter, in this video, you'll discover the story of the action-packed sci-fi movie called Jumper.
Bye, have a great time.
David Rice is an ordinary 15-year-old. During a school break, he talks to Millie, the girl he has a crush on, who tells him about her dreams of traveling the world. One day, David decides to give her a snow globe with a miniature Eiffel Tower as a gift. Miley likes the present, but suddenly Mark interrupts them, mocks the gift, and throws it onto the frozen lake. Despite Miley's pleas, David ventures onto the ice to retrieve the globe. He manages to get it, but the ice beneath him breaks, plunging him into the water. Panicking, Millie tries to help, but David is swept away by the current. Suddenly, he finds himself between the shelves of a library, disoriented. He quickly leaves, clutching the snow globe. Returning home, David, soaked, faces his father, William, with whom he has lived alone for 3 years. William is angry about his lateness. David retreats to his room and locks the door with a chain. When his father tries to force his way in, David suddenly disappears from the room and reappears in the same library. Realizing he has the ability to teleport, David uses it to return to his room. There, he realizes he has a chance at freedom and decides to flee, taking a small sum of money with him. Meanwhile, Millie's mother comforts her, believing David to be dead. Suddenly, Millie notices movement outside and finds the snow globe on the swing, but David is no longer there. David leaves the town to start anew in a big city. He rents a modest room in a motel and practices his abilities in the park, trying to gain greater control over them. One day, while browsing a magazine, he comes across a photo of the Empire State Building, triggering memories of when he visited it with his mother. Suddenly, his entire room shakes, and David teleports to the top of the skyscraper. The next day, David visits the bank and asks the security guard where the toilet is. While the guard leads him to the toilet, David notices the bank vault. That evening, he decides to use his teleportation ability to break into the bank and steal money. He starts the theft, taking as much money as he can carry. Shortly after the incident, the motel owner approaches him to pay for the room, and David pays him with the stolen money. The following day, Roland Cox appears at the bank regarding the stolen money. He works for a government organization called the NSA, which deals with tracking down jumpers, people who can teleport. He asks the bank employee for security camera footage and the names of individuals who have safe deposit boxes. 8 years have passed since those events. David is now a grown man living in a beautiful apartment in New York City. Thanks to his teleportation ability, he lives freely and does as he pleases. His apartment is filled with pictures from various parts of the world, and he keeps all the money he stole in a separate room. He teleports to London and enters a pub. There, he notices a beautiful woman and quickly teleports to her, catching the attention of a man named Griffin. Later, he leaves the pub with the woman, and they spend the night together. Afterwards, David teleports to Fiji to surf the waves, and then he moves on to the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. Meanwhile, in the tropical jungle, Roland pursues one of the jumpers using an electric weapon to prevent his teleportation ability. He kills the boy, calling him a freak. Moments later, he receives a phone call about a string of bank robberies. David returns to his apartment in New York City. He notices someone has been there when suddenly Roland speaks up. Roland introduces himself, claiming to know about David's robberies, adding that he's not from the police. David demands Roland to leave, but Roland already has a weapon ready. When David tries to teleport, Roland uses the weapon on him, disrupting his ability to teleport more than a few meters as thousands of volts surge through his brain. Roland catches David with an electric line, but David teleports to the room where he keeps his stolen money, giving him a moment to get rid of the line. He takes as much money as he can, then disappears and reappears in his old childhood room. His father, hearing the commotion, rushes to David's room and asks him not to disappear, expressing a desire to talk. But David disappears. In the meantime, Roland searches David's apartment and finds pictures of his past love, Millie. The next day, David appears outside Millie's house, but her mother opens the door. After introducing himself, she hugs him, unsure if he survived the incident at the frozen lake all those years ago. When asked where to find Millie, her mother says she still lives in town and works as a waitress. Later, David appears in the bar and observes Millie. When he tries to leave, Mark recognizes him. David pretends not to know him, then approaches Millie. She smiles at his sight, but when Mark inappropriately touches her, she hits him, leading to a fight between them. When no one is looking, David teleports them to the bank he robbed. He leaves Mark there and returns, telling Millie that Mark left, surprising her. When she asks about his occupation, David says he works in banking. When she asks about his future plans, he says he wants to travel and offers her a trip to Rome, remembering her childhood dream of going there. Their conversation is observed by Griffin. Next, David and Millie get out of the taxi and find themselves in Rome. Meanwhile, Roland interrogates Mark. Upon leaving, he makes a phone call and informs someone that the girl in the photo is Millie and that she boarded a plane to Rome with someone 16 hours ago. Then, David and Millie check into a beautiful and spacious room. Millie notices that David is hiding something from her, suspecting that he doesn't really have money from working in banking because he failed algebra in school. Later, they share passionate moments and go to visit the Colosseum. When they try to enter, the guard states that it's impossible. David is displeased and decides to discreetly break in. Millie is hesitant about the idea, but ultimately they enter together, and Millie is amazed by the Colosseum. David steps away from Millie for a moment to open the closed doors from the other side when he encounters Griffin. Griffin enlightens him that he's not the only one who can teleport, and that his reckless behavior has made him a target for the Paladins, a group tasked with eliminating all jumpers. At that moment, the Paladins appear, but Griffin isn't surprised as he knew David was being pursued. A fight ensues. David gets caught by an electric line, while Griffin fights off two Paladins, and meanwhile, Miley is worried about the noise. Eventually, David frees himself, and Griffin defeats the remaining Paladins. Griffin explains to David who the Paladins are, and that he has been fighting them for years. A staff member notices them and calls the police. Griffin teleports away, and David sees his jump scar and teleports to his location, uncovering his hideout. Griffin instructs him to disappear, reminding him to take care of Miley. David returns to the Colosseum and tells Miley they should leave. Miley asks him what's wrong, noticing something is amiss. As they exit, they are stopped by the police, who arrest David and take him in for questioning. David maintains that he did nothing wrong, but the police officer takes his passport and tells him to wait for the magistrate from the U.S. Embassy. When the officer briefly leaves, a woman enters, revealing herself to be his mother, Mary. She gives him the keys to his handcuffs and instructs him to leave the girl and escape because they're going to lock him up. The woman leaves, and David follows her, but she disappears. He frees himself from the handcuffs and exits the police station with Millie, telling her that they let him go. Millie is confused and notices David's strange behavior. They get into a taxi and head to the airport. Millie expresses her desire to know the truth and asks what's in his backpack. He shows her a large amount of cash and tells her that she can't fly with him and they have to part ways. Millie is disappointed and walks away, leaving David to wrestle with his thoughts. Meanwhile, Roland learns that David escaped from the Paladins and realizes he might have known about it earlier, and then goes to William's house. He introduces himself and asks when was the last time he saw his son, but William replies that it was 8 years ago. Roland then inquires about David's mother, to which William responds that she disappeared when their son was 5 years old. Roland sees her photo and recognizes her. Later, David appears at Griffin's location and asks him about the Paladins. Griffin explains that there are hundreds of them and that the Paladins have been killing jumpers since medieval times. They are cunning and organized religious fanatics who believe that only God should have such power and resent the fact that jumpers can do as they please. He adds that they are determined and will stop at nothing to kill his loved ones. At this moment, David begins to worry about his father and Millie. David returns home and finds his father lying on the floor. He teleports with him to the hospital and begs for help. Then, he goes back to Griffin and informs him that he needs to find Roland, but Griffin advises against it, showing him his scars from his previous encounter with Roland. He tells David to forget about Roland and leave it to him, as he has been tracking him for many years. David suggests joining forces, but Griffin rejects the idea, saying he works alone. Griffin teleports to Japan, with David following him. He follows Griffin and tries to convince him to team up to defeat Roland. Eventually, Griffin agrees after David reveals that he knows where Roland might be. Griffin steals a car, and they drive through the streets of Tokyo, discussing their origins with jumping. The next day, they teleport to the airport in Detroit, where Millie's plane lands, suspecting that Roland will be waiting for her there. They learn that her plane has already landed, and agree that David will find her while Griffin arms himself for the encounter with Roland. David searches for Miley at the pub where she works, but the waitress tells him she doesn't know where she is, adding that Roland was at the pub a moment ago. David immediately appears at her apartment and meets Millie. She refuses to talk to him and tells him to leave when he notices Roland has arrived outside her building. He confesses to her that he doesn't work in banking and that he stole money from the bank, revealing his ability to her. Millie runs away upon seeing this, but he catches her and decides to teleport with her to Griffin's hideout, shocking Miley. Shortly after, Roland enters her apartment and sees the jump scar. He activates a machine that opens a rift in space. David tells Griffin that he brought this upon Miley, and Griffin is furious with him because he knows the Paladins have a machine that will allow them to reach them. When they see the jump scar expanding, Roland appears in Griffin's hideout. As they both hide, David sees a photo of his mother on the wall, but at that moment, he is caught by an electric line. When Roland tries to kill David, Griffin uses a flamethrower, saving him. A fight ensues between Griffin and Roland. Using his abilities, Griffin throws Roland out of his hideout and teleports to London, returning seconds later with a bus aimed at Roland. He manages to escape the bus, while Miley finds David chained to the wall. As Roland approaches them again, Griffin reappears with the Paladin's device, preventing them from being caught. As the jump scar closes, the line hits Millie and pulls her into Roland's grasp. David wants to save Millie, but Griffin has a different idea and prepares a bomb to teleport with her to Miley's apartment to get rid of the Paladins once and for all. David doesn't accept this and teleports to the Colosseum with the bomb. Griffin immediately appears there after him. They begin to fight for the detonator, teleporting to many places in the process. Eventually, they land in Chechnya, where a war is raging, and Griffin retrieves the detonator. However, he fails to notice a falling pylon, and David takes advantage of this, teleporting him into it, immobilizing him, and preventing him from teleporting due to the massive amount of electricity. Griffin asks David to free him and promises to help him save Miley, but David doesn't trust him and appears in Miley's apartment. When he tries to free her, the Paladins are already waiting for him and capture him with several high-voltage lines, which they attach to the walls. David uses all his strength to teleport, causing the entire apartment to shake. At that moment, Millie apologizes to him for what she said earlier, and David teleports the entire apartment along with everyone into the lake. As all the Paladins drown, David teleports the apartment to the library. When they think it's over, Roland emerges from the ruins of the apartment. David catches him and teleports them to a high ledge in a cliff, leaving him there. Sometime later, David goes to a house he doesn't recognize. A girl he doesn't know opens the door and asks if he is Mary. After a moment, his mother appears at the door. It turns out that his mother is a paladin, and when David first teleported at the age of 5, she decided to abandon him, knowing that otherwise, she would have to kill him. She explains that she abandoned him out of love to protect him. They hug, and then David leaves. Millie is waiting for him, and they disappear together.